Welcome to Under the Radar, a show about independent iOS app development. I'm Marco Arment.
And I'm David Smith. Under the Radar is never longer than 30 minutes, so let's get started. So I am in the process of wrapping up development on my next app.
You?
Yes, another one. It's truly shocking and, a revelation that I'd be working on a new app. But I am. And I'm at the point now where the app is mostly finished. It's like functionally complete. I'm getting ready to start sort of more broad testing and that kind of thing. And it's an app that's geared in the health and fitness area that I've been doing recently to sort of join the ranks of Pedometer++ and Sleep++. This one's about displaying the activity and fitness data collected by Apple Watches in a hopefully a more useful way. So I'm through like the part that I have a lot of comfort with in terms of sitting down and just building an app, like the actual opening Xcode and coding. That part I always feel good about. But now I'm hitting a more challenging part of it, at least for me, that I thought would be interesting to talk about. And that's the process of working out the business model that I'm going to ultimately launch the app with. And maybe some people would think that it would be a better idea to have the business model in mind before I make the app. But that's just not the way I work. I have an idea, I start building it. A few weeks later, I have the app. That's just how my process works. So now I hit the point that I have to decide, what am I going to do with this? And you'd think at this point, like I've been doing this for long enough and I've launched enough apps that I would just like immediately know what it is I'm going to do. But the kind of awkward reality is I looked at it and I'm like, I don't really know what I want to do for this app. Like I could make it do so many different things. Like the number of options available to app developers these days is kind of wild in terms of it's not just like sort of like the old days where it's like you could have a paid app or a free app. Or like push it free with ads. And then like they introduced in-app purchase. And originally in-app purchases were only in paid apps. And so you could have like extra, what they call like premium apps. And then they added in-app purchase for free apps. So we can do that now. And there's recently been a whole big wave of fitness apps being purchased by big companies. And so that's even like this other kind of vague, not like a business plan, but it's sort of like a concept of people are making fitness apps and eventually being purchased by bigger companies and making their money that way. And so that leaves me in kind of a crazy thing. And so what I wanted to do this week is to sort of think out loud and get your thoughts, Marco, about how to proceed and kind of the considerations and the thoughts that go into this. Because I imagine anybody who is making an app, a product, something like that, you have to go through this kind of mentality, this thought process to think, what's ultimately going to be best for you. And the answer is probably different for everybody. So thinking, rather than just giving an answer, explaining how I'm going to hopefully end up with an answer is probably more helpful.
So for me, I think one of the ways to look at this first off is if you have any previous apps that you've made, especially anything you've made in recent years, since the economy always changes in the App Store, any parallels you could draw from other apps of like what might be the best pricing model for like, a similar app that you've made and how that's done.
Sure. And probably the closest app to this is, it's of all my apps, it's certainly going to be Pedometer++ or Sleep++, which are fitness apps. And probably in many ways, Sleep++ is actually, I guess Pedometer++ in the early days had the same thing where like, because it's an app that's tied to a particular platform, like when Pedometer++ launched, it was tied to the iPhone 5S. And if you didn't have a 5S, it was worthless to you. And then, Sleep++, if you don't have an Apple Watch, it's useless to you. And, this new app, if you don't have an Apple Watch, it's not really going to be able to show you anything useful. So those are probably like the closest to the way I do it now. And those are both free with ads and an in-app purchase to remove the ads. And in the case of Pedometer++, the in-app purchase is structured as a consumable tip jar type of thing. And in Sleep++, it's just like a one-time regular, like an in-app purchase to remove ads with a nice little message saying, thank you so much.
And Pedometer++ does not have ads at all, right?
It does.
Oh, okay.
It didn't initially launch with them. Initially, it just launched with the tip jar. But that I introduced ads after a while because the tip jar, while conceptually I liked, from a performance perspective, didn't do that as well. At least until I added ads to it. And once I added ads, like once there was both the carrot, like, hey, support me, this is great, and the stick of I'm going to show ads in the app unless you pay, like the combination of those two, it led to a much more robust adoption of the tip jar. And so I added ads, and it's been working much better since then. Because otherwise I'd find sort of I launch it, or I launch a big update, and I'll get this kind of like this little wave of goodwill, and then it drops to almost nothing. And so that didn't really work in the long run.
That makes sense. So now it seems like the most logical conclusion then, if you say that the new app is most similar to Pedometer++ and apps like this, and the Pedometer++ and Sleep++ both have this kind of, ads with paid options to remove them models, and they both work pretty well, it seems on the surface that would be the best choice. But with iAd shutting down this summer, then obviously that throws a wrench into everything, right?
Exactly. Yeah. Like I look at this and it's more complicated, both because of that and also because in a weird way, I also want, like, I kind of want diversity in my income stream. And so like having everything be the same model sometimes makes me wonder if that's problematic. Like if all of my money is coming from ads, it's sort of in the same way that, like, fair enough, I can move to another advertising platform, but if there was some app store policy change, for example, that changed the types of advertising that were allowed, and it led to, essentially meant that advertising rates collapsed. Like if all my income is coming from advertising, that's probably problematic. Or if the types of ads that are available, become more and more skeezy and crummy, then I can and if my entire business is based on that, that's not a great position either. And so I end up with this weird thing of there's a lot of things that I could do. And when I was taking a step back and thinking and sort of preparing for this episode, I kept trying to coming back to it. It's ultimately I have to decide. And this is really, I think that you can build a business model to do one of four things. You can either maximize the money that you get now. You can maximize the reliability of income you'll get later. You can maximize the overall money the app will ever receive in its lifetime, or you can try and maximize your user base. Which one of those things will vary dramatically will then decide which business model makes the most sense for you. Because if I want the most money now, well, I should probably do a paid app. Just charge money up front, hope for a little bit of press when the app launches, kind of get a big push, have a couple of days with nice big sales, and then it'll likely fall off pretty dramatically. At least that's my experience, is that you end up with this very steep drop off afterwards. But in that first week or so, you can actually make quite a lot more than you would probably be able to make from any of the other models. And so you can make it now. And if I want reliable income, something like advertising is great because there isn't kind of this one-time purchase nature to it where people just keep, every time they open the app, I make, a fraction of a penny. And so if people keep using the app, there continues to be money coming in. Overall revenue is probably going to be some combination of them, where it's I'm going to do everything. I'm going to have ads. I'm going to have in-app purchases to remove ads. I may have in-app purchases to do features, do everything you could possibly do to try and maximize things. And then if I wanted to just maximize the user base, well, then you kind of take the VC model and say, just make it free. And hope that you'll work something out down the road. If once you have, hundreds of thousands of customers using the app all the time, then hey, that's got to be worth something to someone, right?
Yeah, so I think, with Overcast, I obviously chose pretty much the latter option, which, pretty much make it free. At first I had free with unlock to get all features. Now it's pretty much everything's free and you pay if you feel like it, which is almost like everything's free. And the reason I did that was because I wanted to maximize the user base, really. I have political goals with how I feel about how podcasting apps should and shouldn't be designed. And I want to keep podcasting open and reduce the influence of proprietary gatekeepers and everything. And so for me, it was important to maximize the user base first and then figure out money with that in mind. Not necessarily later, because I didn't delay making money, but just figure out a way to make money while also giving away as much as possible for free. And so, that's the model I chose. That though, that was in the context of this entire ecosystem that had these other factors that I was playing to. In your situation here with this app, with every app, certain models will work better than others. And it depends so much on what the app is, what the competition is, how your market timing is, what the market is itself. So with something like Pedometer Plus Plus, was that initially a paid app or was it always free up front?
It's always free especially it was free because it required an iPhone 5S, and there was no way that I could require you to have one before you purchased it, and so I made it free because I was afraid that there would be lots of people who would pay for it and then immediately discover that it's worthless and go and get a refund or leave a 1-star review. And so it just never seemed like paid would be a viable option.
Right. And so therefore, the same thing applies to this then, because this requires an Apple Watch. So, does it officially require it, or does it, it basically requires it, right?
It basically it would be fairly useless without one.
Right, exactly. So it seems like paid is right out the window, which is unfortunate because actually something like this where you're saying like, it's taking advantage of something new, it's something that is a small market, there's probably going to be very little competition out there, at least at first. So that kind of condition usually is a really good fit for paid, where you have people who are going to be motivated to get it and very little competition, really, and especially it being new. That combination usually means go paid up front. Because you kind of have to be free up front because we don't have real trials, and this would be a great case for a trial. But those don't exist. So instead, you have to be free somewhat. So the only question now is whether you lock some features, whether you use ads, or whether you just don't think about money with this app and use it for other purposes, like promoting your other stuff or giving back to the world or whatever. So going through those one by one, I guess, free with unlock is tricky. Certain apps, there just really isn't a good place to put that locking barrier. So like one of the examples, I think James Thompson talked about this a while ago with pCalc, is, where do you, if you have a calculator that you want to be free up front with a paid app purchase to unlock something, what do you unlock? Like the 9 button? Like it's hard. It's like certain apps are just hard to figure out where to place that barrier in a way that the app isn't totally useless without it, but that enough people will hit that barrier and be motivated to pay. And certain apps, the answer is just, this doesn't fit well, and there isn't a good place for it. And certain apps, there are plenty of places for it, and the question is, where do you put it? And so in this case, do you think there's a good spot to have a paid unlock? Like there's a good feature or set of features or limit that can be removed where enough people will hit that and want to pay, but they won't hate you because it's so annoying every time they hit it?
The only one that comes to mind for an app like this is to do some type of kind of artificial limit on the amount of data that it will display. So you'd have something, it's sort of like in the same way like Pedometer Plus Plus, like it shows you historical data. It would be like, you can only see the current week, unlock to see all kind of a thing. Is the only thing that I could sort of see, because partitioning the feature set or the functionality in other ways, like it feels so contrived, like feels much more like like you don't, it's like you can do multiplication, but you can't do division. Like
right, exactly.
It completely kind of removes the point of the app if you start partitioning the features. And so the only thing I could ever kind of imagine is to say like, hey, I'm only going to show you this amount of data. If you scroll beyond that, there'll be a little box that says, hey, would you like to see the rest of your data? I'm holding it hostage for $2 at the bottom.
Yeah, and that's so tricky to do while also balancing like the user's will to pay you, because it's so easy to just appear really stingy or annoying or cheap with what you give them for free and what you don't. And if they don't feel good about your app, they usually won't pay to get past that barrier. Some people still will, and they will hate you for it. I've done that before with some apps, like some apps where like I really needed it to get my job done, and they offered a free trial, and I kept hitting walls, and eventually I did pay in a lot of these cases, but I just felt terrible. I felt like I hated them for it. And that kind of soured me on the whole company and on, like their future products or my experience with the app or my willingness to recommend it to others. So it's always a hard balance whenever you have these barriers. But that being said, if you have an app where a barrier like this makes sense and where you can find a good place for it and you implement that well, it usually is a really good way to make a reasonable living. Like you can usually get decent income that way without a lot of the problems of things like ads or paid up front. So usually that is great when it works, but it is really hard to make it work.
Yeah, and I think one thing that I always struggle with when I'm trying to think of this, it's like, it's what am I communicating to my customer? Because like the hardest part, I think, like that you have to get over, and a little bit I think you were alluding to it for like it makes you feel bad, is when you say like this part of the app is free, like the initial part, like typically it's like the core part, like the main purpose of the app is free, and then there's these extra things that are like cost more. Like the weird thing that you have to keep in mind is in some ways what you're communicating to your customer is like the core part of the app is free, or in some ways you could like, it's not a great word, but it's more helpful for this analogy. It's like this part of the app is worthless. And this other part somehow I'm saying is worthful. But if you look at those as a customer, they may look functionally identical, right? You're saying like, if the ability to do this X, Y, and Z shouldn't cost you anything. And I'm telling you that it shouldn't cost you anything to do these things because I just gave you an app that you downloaded for free that does those things. So I've communicated to you, this is worthless. But this other thing that is essentially probably very similar to the other thing and is in many ways a contrived barrier, like somehow should be valuable. And like there's a dissonance there that I feel like is where it gets really hard. Like you can only really make the case for unlocking something when the thing that you're paying for feels different and like completely orthogonal to the core part of the thing that you gave away for free. So often you'll have something where there's a physical cost associated with it. Like you're paying for storage or for a sync, to access sync, or something where it's not the thing that I gave you for free. Just, it's something totally different in a sort of a tangible way. Because when you do that, I think maybe that's where you can get around that feeling of like, I feel bad about this because I feel like they're just kind of, like being cheap by creating this artificial limit.
It's tough too, because when you put up a limit like that, people will hit it and they will try to rationalize not going past it. So if you put up a limit and you say, well, you can only see the last week of data or whatever, whatever limit you put up.
Yeah.
People are going to hit that and they're first going to think, well, I guess I don't need that, right? Like they're going to try to convince themselves they don't need that because they don't really want to pay. So they're going to try to say, well, you know what, I can get along fine without that. And even if they would enjoy the app more with that, even if they would get their $2 or whatever worth of enjoyment or value out of having gone past that barrier, they will try very hard to convince themselves, even if it's subconscious, not to go past that barrier. And so you'll have so many people who really could use the app, who really could enjoy it a lot more if they would pay the $2, but who have convinced themselves they don't need to because they would rather not. And that's the issue I faced with Overcast. That's one of the reasons I went patronage eventually. It's just very hard, but I don't know. And then we have a lot more better options, or different options at least, including ads. But let's read an ad first, because podcasts are ad supported for many reasons that we don't have time to talk about now. This episode of Under the Radar is brought to you by Hover. Quite simply, Hover is the best way to buy and manage domain names. When you have an idea for a project, naming it can be very difficult, but Hover provides a great search where you can search for a few keywords, or you can type in exactly the name you need, and they will show you all the different top-level domains that are out there, and you can find a domain that works for you. That's what you want with something on the end of it, whether it's .com or .plumbing, they'll find you something. They give you lots of options. It's great. Now, I don't want to be faced with 1,000 screens or tons of add-ons or high prices when I'm buying my domain names. I just want to get in, pick what I need, buy it, and get on with building my new idea. Now, with Hover, it's really easy because they don't try to force you through crazy upsells or crazy scams or anything like that. And it's very well designed and very easy to use and very fast to really just get what you need, get in and get out, and you're done. That's it. .coms Really affordable, just only $12.99 right now. This includes Whois Privacy for free. All the domains are very reasonably priced after that, and almost every domain includes Whois Privacy. As long as it's possible to include, they will include it. They also have fantastic customer support if you ever need it, including amazing telephone support where you can just call them up and a human being just picks up the phone and answers your questions without transferring you, without putting you on hold, without going through a robot menu, anything like that. It's amazing. They have all sorts of great support, great stuff too, way longer than what I can talk about in this little ad read. So just check it out today. Go to hover.com and try it out. Use code COCO at checkout, and you'll get 10% off your first purchase at hover.com, and show your support for Under the Radar and all of Relay FM. Thank you very much to Hover for sponsoring this episode. So there's also ad-supported apps. To me, it sounds like it'd be a decent idea, because it sounds like you get money for when the app is being used, and no one has to decide whether to pay you or not, because the ad is paying you automatically, effectively, if they use the app. And they can maybe pay to remove it or something, and that's a separate discussion, which I'm sure we'll have. But at the heart of it, you kind of automatically just get money slowly with usage. Of course, there's downsides in practice, things like privacy concerns, annoyance concerns, image concerns. What do you think about apps with ads?
Yeah, it's an uncomfortable. It's like if you may have noticed, that was an uncomfortable intake of breath.
Yeah,
because I don't like using apps that have ads in them, but I make a substantial amount of my revenue from ads. And there's a little bit of cognitive dissonance about that. It's ultimately the pragmatic part of this is the practical way to make revenue. But the reality is my app is never made better by having an ad in it. It's not oh, wow. Well, it's people will love it when they can see ads for other, for a Game of War or Clash of Clans or whatever, the latest free to play game is, which is essentially what most online ads mobile ads seems to be these days. They're for one of those games, or for a big brand like Audible or Google or something like that. And so putting those into my apps always feels a little bit not great. But the reality is, like you said, it works well. And I like conceptually the fact that I'm getting paid for use in a way that it's a really nice virtuous cycle. I want to make an app that's really engaging, and you want to keep opening up and looking at, if I'm showing you, health and fitness data, hopefully it's motivating. Hopefully it's something that you want to go and check on a regular basis. And so aligning a business model with that, where it is something that the more you use it, the more money I make, is great. And in some ways it makes me think of the way that, I almost kind of wish that there was a mechanism kind of like what musicians have with streaming services.
Oh, you don't want that.
Not necessarily. Well, conceptually, I do. I don't necessarily it breaks down in certain ways, obviously, all these things do. But conceptually,
just add a bunch of zeros to the number, basically. Yeah. Then we want that version of it. That version
would be so great, right? But conceptually, every time someone listens to the song, they get a bit of money. And if every time someone opens my app, I got a bit of money, that would be great. If such a thing sort of existed, if there was rather than Apple Music, there was Apple App, and people paid a certain amount of money and it was distributed around people based on what they used or something, right? You could imagine a system that would sort of work in that way. It's hugely problematic, and I'm not really advocating for that, but conceptually, a version, it would be the business model that ads create, but without the potential for kind of not desirable aesthetics in my apps. So that would be great. That doesn't exist. And so you end up with ads, and you ultimately, I end up most likely than not, that's ultimately what I'll probably have to do is I look at it and it's if I have ads in this app, I will, if it's successful, if it's just downloaded wildly, then I will likely, make a reasonable amount of semi-reliable income from it. And if it's sticky and people really like it and keep coming back to it, my revenue will continue to, if not grow, at least stay stable in the long term, which is great. See our episode about work-life balance that we just did, where I talked about the more you can make your income kind of passive and not related to what you're doing, the better. And so ads are great for that, because it's all based on work you've done in the past, like continuing to pay you in the future. I just wish it didn't make me feel so kind of like, whenever I do it.
Yeah, and it seems like with ads, like you could do something crazy like direct sales of ads, but that's a lot of work. It's the best for like privacy maximization, really, and it might be the classiest, but that's a ton of work. And as you go like kind of down the rabbit hole of like, well, I could join a network. And then a small app network, if that existed, which I don't even know if it does. But assuming that existed, then we pool resources. Selling ads is a little bit easier. Maybe I don't have to do it anymore, or I can share a salesperson with somebody else. And then as you get further down, it's like, well, all these things are a lot of work until you get down to I can just plug in a module from a big ad provider where I might not have even dealt with a human at all to be part of this thing. You're getting who knows what ads from who knows where, and they're doing who knows what with your customers' privacy and data. But that's also the easiest for you, and like that. And so, like with ads, the incentives are all towards getting creepier and creepier because the easiest ways to get into ads and the most accessible ways to get into ads happen to also be the worst about privacy and customer data in most cases. Whereas, anything better than that tends to take more work than what most people can really devote to it.
Exactly. And in my first ever foray into ads, I did actually sell them direct. Like this was like way back early days of the App Store because like ad networks didn't exist. And like I would sell ads typically it was to other app developers at very small amounts of money. But it's like that was the best you could do back then. But now, yeah, like you install iAd for the next couple of months, or AdMob from Google, or any of the million things. Like see our previous episode about ads, where there's like so many networks and all kinds of things, and you just kind of put it in, and like in theory, like, and then money will start flowing, and like that's great. It's like in some ways, this is an area though. Like speaking of the last version of like business model that probably doesn't really fit from what I do, but is interesting nevertheless, is I am kind of envious of venture funded companies in this regard because they don't have a business model. Like they don't need...
Well, they have a different business model. Their business model is get really huge and worry about it later, even though that usually means probably get bought before we have to worry about it.
Exactly.
Which is a business model. It's just different from what we do.
Yeah. And like, I look at that and I'm like, in some ways, that's actually kind of cool. Like to be able to just say like, you know what, I'm just going to focus on making something cool and getting as many people as I can to use it. And I don't need to worry about the financial part of that. And in some ways, like, that's kind of interesting. Like I definitely had the thought for something like this of saying like, you know what if I just took that tack and like hope, it's like MyFitnessPal got bought by Under Armour, Runkeeper got bought by ASICS. Like at some point could if I was able to make a wildly successful health and fitness app that could be picked up by some other company for, and it's probably in some ways more money than I could ever make from, running AdMob ads in an application. Like that sounds kind of interesting. It's just like the risk dynamic on that just like goes through the roof, where it's like, or I could end up with having made this cool thing that ends up making me no money ever. And that's kind of terrifying as well.
Yeah, right. All right. Well, what do you think you're going to do? Have you come to any conclusions, or are you still going to think about it?
I'm still going to think about it. I'm probably going to do I think my default is going to be ads. Like, I don't think paid works. I don't think unlocking features really works. Like, I don't like the thought of...
Right. And to clarify, really works for this app on both of those.
For this app. Yeah, yes. Exactly. Like, the whole point of this discussion is like yes. Whether it works in this particular case. And like the reason we're going through it step by step is that every app is different. This is why this may or may not make sense for this app. Ads are like the easy thing. I don't feel great about them, but I think they are sort of like the obvious and straightforward choice. I'll almost certainly have an option to remove the ads, just in terms of that's often just, it makes me feel better. Maybe it's just like cleansing my conscience a little bit about not having ads, to say like, it's like if you don't like them, that's fine. Then it's just a paid app and you can give me money and they'll go away. And if I'm feeling particularly daring or a little bit reckless and wild, then maybe I'd just make it free. But being a one-person shop who pays my mortgage with the revenue from my apps, not having any revenue does not seem particularly wise.
Yeah. All right. Well, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks a lot to our sponsor, Hover, and we will talk to everybody next week.
Bye.